The Senate chamber felt frozen in time. Not a single whisper, not a shuffle of paper, just a heavy, unnatural silence pressing down on everyone in the room. Even the marble walls seemed to hold their breath, as if they too sensed that something monumental was about to happen. The camera slowly swept across the chamber. Senators sat rigid in their seats, their faces drawn with concern and anticipation. Some gripped the edge of their desks, knuckles white. A few exchanged anxious glances, their eyes silently asking, "Are you ready for this?" Journalists in the press gallery leaned forward, their pens hovering mid-air, waiting for the first sign of movement. For just a moment, the usual buzz of Washington politics vanished, replaced by a single overwhelming feeling: a storm was coming, and no one knew who would survive its aftermath. It was the kind of silence that comes before a thunderclap, the calm before a political hurricane. And everyone knew after today nothing in this chamber would ever be the same. At one end of the chamber sat Mitch McConnell, 83 years old, composed and coldly confident. For over 4 decades he had moved through Washington like a shadow, quiet, calculating, and nearly untouchable. His silver hair was slicked back, his dark suit tailored to perfection, and his eyes betrayed nothing but certainty. To many, he wasn't just a senator, he was the institution itself. The face of conservative power, the master of procedural warfare, a political tactician whose mere presence could freeze a debate and silence opposition. Across the aisle, a very different figure was seated, Jasmine Crockett, 43 years old, sharp, unapologetically bold. A civil rights attorney from Dallas who had spent her life standing up for those silenced by the system. No fancy legacy, no family dynasty, just grit, legal firepower, and a voice that demanded to be heard. She wasn't bred for Washington. She fought her way into it. The contrast between them wasn't just political, it was generational, cultural, even moral. He represented the old guard, polished, privileged, and used to having the final word. She represented the rising tide, diverse, determined, and unafraid to call out injustice, even in the halls of power. All eyes flickered between them. Some expected a massacre, others silently hoped to witness a miracle. And yet, everyone, even the most seasoned politicians in the room, felt it in their bones. This wasn't just a debate. It was a collision between two Americas, one fading and one just beginning to roar. Mitch McConnell rose slowly from his seat, the way a veteran warrior might before delivering a final blow. He adjusted his glasses, not out of necessity, but with the calculated precision of someone who knew every gesture would be broadcast, dissected, and immortalized. He cleared his throat. And then, with a coldness that sent a chill through the room, he began. "Mr. President," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "I rise today out of deep concern, not just for the Senate, but for the institution of governance itself." He didn't say Jasmine Crockett's name right away. That was deliberate. It made what followed feel like a punishment, not a debate. We've seen, unfortunately, a rise in a new type of legislator, one who believes passion can replace experience. Who mistakes Twitter applause for constitutional understanding? Who thinks shouting louder means leading better? And then, with a smirk that only deepened the cruelty, he turned to face her directly. The junior member from Texas has recently been quite vocal on issues she clearly does not yet grasp. Gasps echoed softly across the chamber. Crockett's face remained unreadable, but those watching, especially women, especially people of color, could feel the blade under McConnell's words. This wasn't policy criticism. This was character assassination wrapped in a silk tie and laced with the venom of decades-old power. Civil rights, voting access, judicial process. These are not topics for campaign slogans. They are not TikTok trends. They are sacred and must be handled with maturity. The press gallery stirred. Phones began to light up. Reporters started typing furiously. They knew this wasn't just a speech. It was an ambush. On social media, viewers watching the live stream began commenting in disbelief. Did he just imply she's too young, too black, too loud? He's trying to humiliate her on national TV, McConnell continued, voice colder by the minute. Perhaps the junior member might benefit more from listening than lecturing. Governing requires more than just viral moments. And with that, he sat down, calm, pleased, like a man who thought he had just silenced a threat. But in that moment, the temperature in the chamber shifted. Not everyone saw power. Some saw cowardice disguised as tradition. And millions watching across the country, they didn't just see politics, they saw a bully. This wasn't the first time the old guard tried to silence a rising voice. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever stood on the Senate floor, history had already written this chapter again and again with different names, but the same pattern. When a 35-year-old Barbara Jordan gave her speech on the Nixon impeachment, some senior lawmakers turned their chairs, refusing to look at her. A black woman, educated and brilliant, daring to speak in a room they thought belonged only to them. When Shirley Chisholm ran for president in 1972, the establishment laughed. Too loud, they said. Too black. Too female. But she didn't run for permission. She ran to make a point that the People's House should belong to all people. Even Thurgood Marshall, years before he became a Supreme Court justice, was once told by a senior senator, "You're brilliant, son, but don't expect this room to ever belong to you." Now it was Jasmine's turn, and the echoes of the past were deafening. McConnell's words weren't just about Crockett, they were about every woman who had been told she was too emotional, every black voice that had been labeled angry, every fresh idea that was brushed off as inexperienced. To millions watching from home, this wasn't a Senate speech. It was a replay of history. It was another moment where power tried to preserve itself by humiliating the future. And if you've ever been the youngest in the room, if you've ever been interrupted, ignored, or underestimated, then in that moment you didn't just understand Jasmine Crockett, you were her. The tension wasn't just political, it was personal, it was ancestral, and it was about to boil over. She didn't flinch. As the final words of McConnell's attack echoed through the Senate chamber, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, didn't move. The silence after his speech felt like an eternity, but it was her cue, and she knew it. Slowly, purposefully, she rose from her seat. She didn't look to her left, she didn't look to her right. Her eyes locked forward, steady, unblinking. Her spine straightened like a steel rod being pulled upright by something unseen but deeply rooted. Not pride, not rage, but resolve. The kind of resolve forged through years of being talked over in courtrooms, of being told she was too young, too loud, or not what a leader looks like, of walking into rooms where no one expected her to belong and walking out with victories no one expected her to earn. And now she stood not just for herself, but for every time she had smiled through disrespect, nodded through condescension, and swallowed the sting of words meant to make her feel small. The folder in her hand was thick, full of truth. But heavier than paper was the weight she carried on her shoulders, the weight of proving herself again. To the old men who had already written her off. To the nation still unsure if it was ready to be led by someone who looked like her, and maybe even to herself. But her steps to the podium were sure, and her silence as she stood behind the microphone spoke louder than McConnell's entire speech. For in that moment, before she even opened her mouth, millions watching didn't just see a woman rising, They saw a woman who had survived. As Jasmine stood behind the podium, her silence cracked open a flood of memories. She was 8 years old, sitting at the back of a Texas classroom. A substitute teacher handed her a worksheet meant for second graders, despite the fact she was in the fifth. When she raised her hand to correct it, the teacher looked her over and said, "Sweetheart, you should focus on behaving, not questioning." She never forgot that. She was 14, watching her mother hold down 2 jobs, coming home with tired hands and a forced smile. There were nights they ate dinner in silence, not out of sadness, but exhaustion. And she had promised herself, "One day I will use my voice so women like her don't have to stay silent anymore." She was 26, fresh out of law school, the only black woman in a courtroom full of white men. She walked into her first trial, and the opposing counsel leaned over to whisper, "Are you lost, sweetheart? This isn't a mock trial." By the end of the week, she had won. And then came the years of grinding cases no one else wanted. Police brutality, housing discrimination, voting rights violations, cases filled with mothers sobbing in courtrooms. Young men in orange jumpsuits with eyes full of fear. And night after night, she pored over files at her kitchen table while the rest of the world slept. Not for praise, not for headlines, but because someone had to fight. And she knew what it was like to grow up unseen. So now, standing in the halls of power, facing a man who had spent decades protecting that very system of erasure, she wasn't afraid. Because she didn't get here by accident. She got here by enduring every no, every smirk, every door slammed in her face. She carried those scars like armor, and today she was ready to use them. She didn't rush. Jasmine Crockett stood motionless for just a second longer, long enough to let the weight of what was coming settle over the room. The chamber, already quiet, seemed to grow even more still. And then, slowly, she placed the folder on the podium. The sound of paper touching wood was barely audible, but to those watching it, thundered louder than any gavel. Her fingers moved with purpose as she unclasped the metal clip, revealing a thick stack of documents, clean, labeled, sharp-edged, like the facts they held inside. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just precise, deliberate calm. But make no mistake, this was a weapon. Across the aisle, McConnell sat with folded arms, his expression unreadable, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly. Crockett took a breath. Not the kind you take when you're nervous, the kind you take when you've waited months for a single moment. A moment where silence becomes strength, where facts become fire, where the one who was underestimated becomes unstoppable. In homes across America, viewers leaned in closer to their screens. People stopped scrolling. Journalists in the gallery lowered their pens, holding their breath, because something in her posture said it all. She wasn't about to react. She was about to rewrite the entire conversation. And no one, not Mitch McConnell, not the Republicans watching, not even her allies, had any idea what was coming. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Jasmine Crockett lifted the first page from the folder and held it up, calm and steady. Let's start with voting records. Her voice was clear even, but each word landed like a hammer. The minority leader has voted against every single major civil rights advancement in the last 20 years. The chamber stirred. She continued without flinching. The Violence Against Women Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Equality Act, each and every time, no. She paused, letting the room absorb the weight of her words. Then she held up another document. But just last month, Senator McConnell released a statement celebrating the anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, calling it, and I quote, "a proud moment in our nation's commitment to equality." She looked up, eyes locked on McConnell. "So which is it, Senator? a proud legacy, or a buried inconvenience? Gasps rippled through the chamber. One contradiction, one knife. But she wasn't done. She pulled out a financial disclosure form, crisp and annotated. Last cycle, the minority leader received over $2.3 million from corporate PACs, including groups actively lobbying against expanded voting access. Some of these organizations manufacture voting machines with known security flaws. Others oppose automatic voter registration and extended polling hours, especially in minority districts. A low murmur grew louder. Reporters were scrambling. Phones lit up again. This wasn't a speech anymore. This was a takedown. And then she dropped the bomb. She pulled out a single sheet separate from the rest. A printed transcript. At the top, Private Fundraiser 2018. You might remember this quote, Senator, because it came from you. She read it slowly with brutal precision. The key to maintaining power isn't just winning elections. It's controlling who gets to vote in them. Use whatever tools we have. The chamber erupted. Audible gasps, open mouths, even from the Republican side. Crockett didn't flinch. She raised her eyes again. Tell me, Senator, was that integrity talking or strategy? The Republican side fell silent. McConnell's smirk had vanished. His jaw was tight. His eyes fixed forward but blank. And across America, people were on their feet. Comments flooded in. She destroyed him. This is how you fight power with facts. She didn't just clap back, she brought receipts. For years, Mitch McConnell had played the game, rewritten the rules, and dared others to challenge him. Today, Jasmine Crockett didn't just challenge him, she exposed him. He didn't move. For a man who had once shut down presidents with a sentence, who had reshaped the Supreme Court with a smirk, Mitch McConnell sat frozen. His hands, once folded with casual authority, now gripped the armrests. His eyes, usually calculating, detached, were now locked forward, vacant. No words came. None. For the first time in decades, the Senate's master tactician had no script to follow. And worse, he knew everyone was watching. The silence was deafening. No one dared speak. No one blinked. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in slower, capturing every detail of the fall. Then, like thunder cracking a still sky, someone on the Democratic side began clapping. One clap, then another, and suddenly, like a dam bursting, the chamber erupted. Democratic senators stood one by one, then all at once applauding. Not just politely, not just in solidarity, but with fire, with tears in their eyes, with pride. She did it, someone whispered behind the scenes. She shut him down. In the galleries above, young aides, law students, and everyday citizens rose to their feet. Some were crying. Others just stared in stunned silence. But all of them felt it. Something had shifted. This wasn't just a win. This was history tilting. McConnell remained seated, stiff as stone, like a man who had just seen the ghost of his own power vanish. And in that moment, the entire nation understood. The old way had just cracked. And Jasmine Crockett, she wasn't just a freshman anymore, she was a force. It took less than 5 minutes. The clip of Jasmine Crockett's takedown hit Twitter like a lightning strike, shared by a political intern in the gallery with the caption, "She didn't just survive McConnell, she ended him." From there, it exploded. Within 30 minutes, #CrockettCrushesMcConnell was the top trending topic in the country. Within an hour, it was global. TikTok users synced her speech to dramatic music. Instagram flooded with memes, one side by side of McConnell's smug face before the takedown and his hollow stare after, simply captioned, "How it started versus how it ended." Another viral image showed Jasmine at the podium, calm and collected, with bold white text, "The most dangerous person in the room is the one who comes prepared." Late-night comedians replayed her quote on voting rights. Activists cut her audio over scenes of protest and hope. Even political analysts who once ignored her began calling it a defining moment of a generation. But it wasn't just about the views. It was about what it felt like. Millions of Americans, especially young people, women, people of color, watched that video and felt something unlock inside them. They saw someone who looked like them, sounded like them, and stood alone on a Senate floor and win. It was the underdog's dream, the unspoken prayer of everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet. And now they had a new answer. This is what happens when you don't. Truth has power, but power always pushes back. In the hours after the Senate confrontation, Mitch McConnell's office released a carefully worded statement. It was cold, defensive, laced with denial. The senator's comments were taken out of context. He remains committed to fairness and electoral integrity. Private remarks should not be weaponized. But no one was buying it, not even in his own party. Conservative pundits scrambled to frame the moment as theatrical, accusing Crockett of emotional grandstanding. But behind closed doors, Republican strategists were furious, not at Crockett, but at McConnell. He walked right into it, one anonymous staffer told Politico. He underestimated her, and it cost us. Some GOP senators tried to publicly defend him, but their tone was shaky. For the first time in years, the man known for being 10 steps ahead looked like he was 2 steps behind. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was everywhere. Cable news, podcasts, late-night shows. Her phone rang non-stop. Her staff couldn't keep up with the media requests. Donations poured into her campaign. And yet, behind the cameras, the cost was very real. She received death threats. Online harassment skyrocketed. Political insiders began whispering that she was too aggressive, too divisive, too loud. She was being watched now, not just by supporters, but by enemies who had taken notice. They weren't going to let this go. They were going to test her, break her. And through it all, she stood her ground. "I didn't come here to be comfortable," she told one interviewer. "I came here to tell the truth. And if the truth costs me everything, so be it." Because the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. At first, it felt like a dream. Letters poured in from across the country. Young girls wrote, "You made me believe I could do it too." Retired teachers sent emails thanking her for defending truth. Veterans, nurses, janitors all wrote to say the same thing. "You gave us hope." But behind the applause, shadows stirred. The old guard wasn't done, not by a long shot. Suddenly, Crockett found herself left off key committees. Meetings moved without her knowing. Colleagues who once shook her hand now avoided her gaze. Her inbox filled with admiration by day and threats by night. Anonymous emails, blocked calls, veiled warnings from concerned insiders. Play smart, Jasmine. Don't push too hard. This town has a long memory. You might be right, but you're making powerful people nervous. Even within her own party, whispers started to grow. She's too bold. She's making us a target. We love her spirit, but maybe she should slow down. And for the first time since that historic speech, Jasmine Crockett stood alone in a room full of people. Because changing the game doesn't just come with applause, it comes with isolation, with fear, with silence that feels louder than noise. Viewers who had cheered days ago now watched with worry. Could she hold on? Would they come for her career, her safety, her voice? The fire that made her famous was still burning. But now the air around her was getting thinner. And the question hanging in every heart was no longer, can she fight? It was, can she survive what comes next? She stood on the Capitol steps alone, yet never more supported. The storm had passed, but the skies still felt heavy. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters pushed closer. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She looked straight into the lens. Not with anger, not with fear, but with the quiet fire of someone who just proved that one voice, when it speaks truth, can echo louder than 1,000 lies. "This wasn't about me," she said. "This was about all of us. Every woman who's been told she's too loud. Every person of color told to sit down. Every young voice dismissed by the powerful. Every voter who thinks their voice doesn't count. Today, we reminded them it does." The crowd behind her grew. Not of politicians, but of people. Teachers, nurses, activists, veterans, teens, grandmothers, janitors, farmers, and every single one of them carried the same fire. If she could stand tall in that chamber, then we can stand up anywhere. Her voice had cut through the noise, not with volume, but with truth. Not for power, but for justice. Not for fame, but for those still silenced. Across America, in living rooms, cafes, and quiet midnight phone calls, people whispered the same words. She didn't just fight back, she changed the rules. Because courage is contagious, and sometimes it only takes one voice to crack a wall built over generations. You watched her rise, you felt her pain, you cheered when she refused to back down. But now the story is no longer just about Jasmine Crockett. Now it's about you. Because somewhere in your life there's a moment waiting for your voice. A boardroom, a courtroom, a classroom, a dinner table, a street corner, a silent injustice. And maybe, just maybe, you've been waiting for permission to speak, to act, to believe that one voice can matter. This story proved it can. Change doesn't always begin with crowds. Sometimes it begins with a whisper that dares to rise, with someone who refuses to sit down, with a truth spoken in the face of power. So ask yourself, when your moment comes, will you be ready? Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing anyway. And now that you've seen what one voice can do, what will yours do? If it were you, would you have the courage to stand up to power in the name of justice? Sometimes the strongest voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that dares to speak when silence feels safer. This story reminds us that no matter how powerful the system may seem, truth still has a voice, and it only takes one person to ignite a movement. You don't need a title to make a difference. You don't need power to speak truth. You just need the courage to say enough. So whether you're fighting for fairness in your family, in your workplace, or in your community, remember, you can be the turning point. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more real, raw, and powerful stories that challenge the status quo. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Hit the bell so you'll never miss the next story that dares to speak truth. Because every click, every comment, every share is part of the movement.